In 2014, former Notre Dame star quarterback Everett Golson threw for 3,445 yards with 29 touchdowns and 14 interceptions. That was obviously a pretty good season, but that high turnover margin was a little bit of a stain on what was otherwise a great year for Golson. Ever since then, though, Notre Dame has had some good quarterbacks. You'll probably be surprised who had the best season. No, it wasn't Brandon Wimbush, it was not Ian Book, and it was not even Deshaun Kaiser. It was Jack Coan. In 2021, Cohn threw for 3,150 yards with 25 touchdowns and 7 interceptions. They were also just a couple of dominoes away from making the college football playoff, and while Cohn had a great year, many people are going to probably forget about this season, and in my book, he's pretty underrated. Unfortunately though, it was not enough to get his name called in the 2022 NFL Draft, but he does have a fighting chance of making a 53-man roster and becoming a backup or potentially more in the NFL. In today's video, I want to continue my series where we take a look at players whose stock died during the 2021 season and talk about why they went undrafted. This one is actually pretty interesting as we have an incredible story to tell, how he went from a former lacrosse star to someone who blew up at the last minute, went to a school that was not known for quarterbacks, and then ultimately saved his career. But we have a lot to talk about, but before we can do that, if you're new to the channel and love college football, be sure to hit that subscribe button. If you enjoy the video, be sure to leave a like and a comment as it really helps. And now let's get started. So yeah, we're obviously talking about Jack Coan, and he played at both Wisconsin and Notre Dame, and is currently fighting for a roster spot with the Indianapolis Colts. I think there's a good chance that he's going to get there, but first, we need to tell the whole Jack Coan story and go way back in time. Coan has honestly always been a little bit different. He was riding his bike without training wheels before he was even 3 years old, and in 5th grade, referees would tell his dad that his son was one day going to play in the NFL. Were they joking? Maybe, but Jack's dad always laughed it off and never really thought that was a possibility for his son. Most would have said no way, but Jack's coach actually called it too and knew his talent. Flash forward to when Coan was in 8th grade, he was playing on the JV team and ended up becoming the varsity starter as a freshman. How did he do? He threw for 21 touchdowns with 1,695 yards. That was pretty insane for a true freshman quarterback, but would it be enough to get into the NFL? No, he had a really long way to go. His coach knew one day that he was meant to play the game of football as they played in a huge snowstorm, but Coan was apparently not fazed by the moment, and that is when they knew football was going to be his sport. Except that was not always the case. Coan was a superstar lacrosse player. That's how it seems to work out on the East Coast, as that region is the lacrosse capital of America, and that kid decided he was going to make that his future. He was so good that he committed to play at Notre Dame, which was one of the top programs at lacrosse in the country. This would happen before his sophomore year of high school, and little did he know that he'd be playing at Notre Dame one day, but not as a lacrosse player. It's just mind-boggling how it all played out. There was one moment that changed the course of Coan's athletic career. For some reason, his football coach kept his boat in the Coan's family backyard, so as the coach was getting on his boat one day, he saw Coan's dad repping a Fighting Irish shirt. His coach said to the dad, "Dude, throw that crap out. He's not gonna go to school at Notre Dame. Just throw it out." That is nuts to say to someone to begin with, and was honestly a little bit rude, but the coach had his best interest at mind, as apparently Jack's true love was football, and his coach knew he was going to be a college quarterback one day, and not a college lacrosse player. Here's where the football transformation begins. During his sophomore season, Coan threw for 3,431 yards and 40 touchdowns. This would set the Long Island record for passing yards in a season, so not only did he have the talent, but he now had the numbers to back it up. Coan had football aspirations, but the odds were stacked against him. Long Island did not produce a lot of high-level college football players, but Jack was different. His coach said, quote, "It was like seeing a unicorn." He was a natural quarterback, and his coach would send his film around to a ton of different schools, but many worried about his level of competition. But then, momentum would change. One day prior to Coan's junior season, his coach got a call from James Coley. He was the offensive coordinator for the Miami Hurricanes, and he wanted to see Coan throw. After that, the coach decided to gather a ton of players from the team, and the Miami staff would watch him throw. The coach was stunned. Coley offered Coan a scholarship on the spot, and that coach had just come from California where he'd watched a ton of quarterbacks play. Haas said he saw something different in Coan's game. He said, quote, "I saw 7 quarterbacks in California. None of them looked like Jack did." A week later, Coan got an offer from Syracuse. 2 days after that, an offer from Maryland came in. 4 days after that, Jim Harbaugh offered him a scholarship to play at Michigan. 2 days later, he decommitted from Notre Dame. His coach was right all along. Football was his future. From there, a lot of other schools offered, and he took home a ton of awards. This would not change Cohn though. His coach said, quote, "He just wants to play football. He doesn't want to be involved in the media. He doesn't care if people talk about him. He doesn't care if they say good things or bad things. It's irrelevant. He's such an old school guy. If he could die playing football and nothing else, it's all he wants to do." And I think that's why he's been so successful. He's a worm, he's got his playbook, and won't get out of it. That is an interesting way of putting it, but where was Cohn going to end up going to play college football? Well, he'd take multiple visits. He visited Nebraska, Northwestern, Boston College, and Wisconsin, but eventually, he chose his place to play. He picked the Badgers over the likes of Michigan, Miami, West Virginia, Maryland, and all those other schools he visited. This was a huge get for the Badgers, who were not known for bringing in big-time quarterback prospects. But why did he decide to go to Wisconsin? Well, he said, quote, "Everybody told me I should go to the one place where I really feel it. I really love the coaching staff, the campus, and Madison, Wisconsin. I thought it was a great fit." In total, Cohn had an awesome ride. He went from someone who was committed to playing lacrosse at Notre Dame to one of those high-rising recruit quarterbacks at the end of the season. In total, had an insane high school career. He threw for 9,787 yards and 128 touchdowns. It doesn't stop there though, as he also ran for 2,500 yards and 33 more touchdowns. This all happened at Sayville High School, and he will go down as probably the best player to ever play there. According to 24/7 Sports, Cohn was a 3-star recruit, the number 20 pro-style quarterback, and the 469th best player in the class of 2017. There were some sites that ranked him as a 4-star, but overall, he was just a good quarterback who is now going to go to a place not known for developing quarterbacks at all. So, how would he do? So going into the 2017 season, the Wisconsin Badgers were led by quarterback Alex Hornibrook and had a true freshman superstar in running back Jonathan Taylor. Troy Fumagalli was the team's leading receiver, and they also had a future NFL player in Quintez Cephas. How did Cohn do as a freshman? Well, he was named the backup. He'd end up playing in 3 games as he completed all 5 of his passes for 36 total yards. It was good for him to be a backup in 2017, but that would end up continuing in 2018. Hornibrook would once again become the starting quarterback, and the Badgers mostly leaned on their run game, as once again Jonathan Taylor was unbelievable. Cohn finished the year with 515 passing yards and 5 touchdowns, with 3 interceptions and a 60% completion percentage. He had now spent 2 years holding the clipboard, and 2019 would be his big year. Quarterback Alex Hornibrook would transfer to Florida State, so now the job was Cohn's. His backup would be Graham Mertz, who was a highly recruited player coming out of high school, but Cohn did everything he could to keep that starting job, and honestly, he was great. In his first career start against South Florida, he threw for 200 yards and had 2 touchdowns. He threw for 3 more touchdowns in week 2 against Central Michigan, and then he started to disappear a little bit. He didn't throw his first conference touchdown until their 3rd game against Michigan State, but he would finish the year on a high note. He finished with 2 touchdown passes in a win over number 18 Iowa, had 2 touchdown passes against Purdue, and also had 2 touchdown passes in a win over number 8 Minnesota. He led Wisconsin to a great regular season, as they ended up going 10-2 with their only 2 conference losses coming to Ohio State, and then that weird game against Illinois where they completely had a meltdown in the last few minutes and the Illini kicked a game-winning field goal. Despite that bad loss though, they still ended up getting selected to go to the Big Ten Championship, or in a rematch against Ohio State, where Cohn would run for 2 touchdowns, but it was not enough as Ohio State won 34-21, and Wisconsin would have to settle for the Rose Bowl. Yeah, settle. In a matchup against Justin Herbert, Cohn threw for 186 yards with a touchdown and a pick, but as we all know, Herbert had that late run, and Oregon was the better team, as they won 28-27, giving Cohn an 0-1 record in bowl games. Despite that tough loss in the bowl game, Cohn was still incredible. He completed a school record 236 passes, started all 14 games, and his 2,727 passing yards was the 3rd highest in Wisconsin history. He also finished with 18 touchdowns compared to 5 interceptions, and was named an All-Big Ten honorable mention. Obviously, he had a great first season as a starter, but right as everything got good, it would also be the end for Cohn. Before the 2020 season had begun, Cohn was going to be the starting quarterback, but then one day in practice, he went down on the field. Backup quarterback Chase Wolf recalled the moment. He said, quote, "Cohn started crying. We all started to tear up and get emotional because we knew how much he had put into the program, and it sucked to watch that happen." Nobody really knew it at the time, but that would mark the last day for Jack Cohn as Wisconsin's starting quarterback. Cohn would get foot surgery, and then Mertz would take over and have that incredible Week 1 performance against Illinois. Cohn had a decision to make. He was not promised a starting job for 2021, so he decided to enter the transfer portal. He would end up remaining with the team for a few more weeks and be a leader off the field though. Cohn ended his Wisconsin career with a 68% completion percentage, 3,278 yards, and 23 touchdowns. He was going to be highly sought after in the portal, but things were about to come full circle for him. He chose to go to Notre Dame for his last season of eligibility, and if you remember right, that is where he was originally going to go to become a lacrosse star. This signing was pretty huge, but it honestly went under the radar. One Notre Dame writer said this, quote, "Cohn certainly brings experience to the Notre Dame offense, which is ideal after losing a 3-year starter at the position. Cohn has played on a big stage already, having won a road game against a top 10 opponent, and playing in the Big Ten title game and the Rose Bowl. Cohn would have to learn a new playbook and run a new team, so how would he end up doing there? Well, first he'd have to win the job. He was going to be competing with Drew Pine, Brendan Clark, and their freshman phenom Tyler Buchner. Clark was the odd man out in the race, as Pine, Buchner, and Cohn would all get time during the 2021 season, but Cohn's experience led him to become the starter, and he pretty much played the entire season. In Week 1, they'd go on the road to play against Florida State, and in what was a complete classic, Cohn threw for 366 yards and 4 touchdowns, and led them to a win over the Seminoles in overtime. No one really talks about Cohn's performance in that game though, because that was the game where Mackenzie Milton came back and led the Noles on the comeback to get to overtime. Week 2 was also huge and memorable for Cohn. After trailing against Toledo late in the game, Cohn actually dislocated his finger, but ran to the sideline where his coach put it back into place, and then he threw a game-winning touchdown to Michael Mayer as they survived a scare against the Rockets and won 32-29. In Week 3, he began to find his stride as he threw for over 200 yards and 2 touchdowns in a rivalry win over Purdue. Then Week 4 happened. He'd be facing his former team, the Wisconsin Badgers. It was going to be a good game, and that is exactly how it played out, until the last quarter. Notre Dame ended up running away with that game, and they won 41-13, but Cohn did struggle in that game and was benched for Pine. The following week, Cohn would play his biggest regular season game of the year as number 7 Cincinnati came to town. Unfortunately, in what was the biggest game of the year, Cohn played terrible. He threw for 114 yards without a touchdown, and he threw an interception, and Desmond Ridder and Cincinnati were just the better team, as the Irish lost 24-13 and found themselves behind in the playoff race. Many counted the Fighting Irish and Cohn out for the remainder of the year, but that's when he played his best football. Virginia Tech would be a huge game for him. He was benched in favor of Tyler Buchner, but after he went down, he threw a late touchdown, and they ended up beating the Hokies 32-29. From there, Cohn took the job and ran with it. He led them to back-to-back-to-back wins over USC, North Carolina, and Navy, and then had 3 touchdowns and a dominating performance on the road against Virginia. He threw for 2 more scores and 300 yards against Georgia Tech, and then in his final regular season game against Stanford, he threw for nearly 400 yards with 3 total touchdowns. The Irish finished the regular season 11-1, but they would fall just short of making the playoff. Instead, they were selected to play in the Fiesta Bowl against Oklahoma State, and Cohn would go out in style. In a 2-point loss to the Cowboys, Cohn threw for 509 yards with 5 touchdowns and only 1 pick. This was an incredible end to the season, and Cohn put the exclamation mark on a great career. He finished the 2021 campaign with 3,150 yards with 25 touchdowns and 7 interceptions. This was the best single-season performance since Everett Golson, and now Cohn was going to try to make his way onto an NFL roster. Despite having a good arm and a pretty good career to his name, Cohn was not selected in the 2022 NFL Draft and would have to sign as an undrafted free agent. He ended up picking the Indianapolis Colts, and for a little while, it looked like he was going to have a chance to make the roster. Obviously, the Colts have Matt Ryan as their starter, and they just drafted Sam Ehlinger in 2021, so those two were likely locks to be on the roster. But once they signed Foles, it makes it pretty unlikely that they're going to keep 4 quarterbacks on the roster. Currently, it is late July, and Cohn has played pretty well for the Colts, but he will have to show out in training camp and show that he is worth a roster spot. Unfortunately, I don't think the Colts will keep 4 quarterbacks on the roster though, and Cohn will likely be a practice squad player. When you take a look at his long-term impact, some believe he could be a backup, while others believe he could be out of the league after this season. To be honest, I don't really know, but Cohn has a good arm, has good measurables, and has a very good work ethic, so I would not count him out from making an NFL roster at some point. A lot of people considered him just a game manager while he was at Wisconsin, but in his 1 season at Notre Dame, he showed he could sling the rock and win big-time games. The ultimate reason why he probably went undrafted is because he chose to spend most of his career at Wisconsin. Had he put up numbers like that at Notre Dame for more than 1 year, then he definitely would have heard his name called, and the whole narrative around him would probably be different. But we're just going to have to wait and see what happens. If you're a Notre Dame fan, what do you think of Cohn, and where does he rank among recent Notre Dame quarterbacks? Let me know another player or topic I could take a look at in my next video. And before you go, don't forget to like and subscribe, as I'd really appreciate that. If you're still here, check out all my other videos on the end screen, and I hope to see you guys again soon. But until next time, peace.